Deep in the remote mountains of Kentucky, along the perilous wilderness road to the western frontier, stood an inn whispered about by travelers like a well-kept secret. Millbrook Inn offered more than food and rest. It gave weary souls something rare, a warmth that lingered long after the fire died. Run by the four enigmatic Cunningham sisters, it drew men from across 3 states. Their reputation so alluring that merchants delayed deals and cattlemen risked dangerous detours just to bask in the sisters' legendary hospitality. Guests spoke of the intimacy, the comfort, the care so personal that it left hardened men in tears. But in the winter of 1851, disturbing stories began to surface. Wagons left abandoned horses wandering without riders. The road to Millbrook had become a trail of ghostly remnants. Authorities dismissed it as frontier paranoia until the disappearances could no longer be ignored. Dozens of men had vanished last seen on the mountain path leading to that seemingly welcoming doorstep. But before we uncover the chilling truth of what really happened, take a moment to subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love hearing from fellow seekers of America's buried secrets. The warmth of Millbrook Inn, as it turned out, came with a price more terrifying than anyone dared imagine. It all began in 1831 when Jeremiah Cunningham succumbed to consumption, leaving his 4 daughters, Margaret, Catherine, Sarah, and Elizabeth, to manage the estate nestled between Virginia's Shenandoah Valley and the Kentucky frontier. The property, built in 1798, stretched across 800 acres and was anchored by a strategically placed inn on the Wilderness Road. Margaret, at 26, had a sharp business mind and a colder edge that hinted at danger. Catherine, 24, possessed a mesmerizing charm. Sarah, 22, had her mother's mastery of herbs, a talent with dark potential. And young Elizabeth, just 16, exuded innocence that disarmed even the wariest traveler. Their home, a sturdy 2-story log structure overlooking the valley, offered 6 cozy guest rooms, hearty meals, and roaring hearths. But more than the amenities, it was the sisters' ability to make guests feel adored that turned Millbrook into a legend. With Ezra Hawthorne, the loyal mountain foreman, and the efficient Zimmer brothers running the land, the inn thrived. By autumn of that same year, it had entered what would be remembered as its golden era. Each sister brought a unique touch. Margaret ensured profits. Catherine kept guests lingering. Sarah's herbal remedies soothed the body and soul, and Elizabeth's bright spirit warmed even the coldest heart. But the isolation that once protected them now concealed something far more sinister. Privacy became power, and power unchecked turned dangerous. That darkness revealed itself on a frigid night in November 1832, when Thomas Kellerman, a wealthy, recently widowed cattle buyer from Richmond, arrived alone with gold coins and loneliness. The sisters recognized the type immediately, a man with money and no ties. Margaret welcomed him with practiced ease, noting his fine clothes, heavy saddlebags, and the grief in his eyes. He didn't just need rest, he needed connection. Inside the warmth of the hearth, the smell of Sarah's venison stew and Catherine's fresh wildflowers offered a seductive escape from grief. Over the next 3 days, Kellerman received more than hospitality. He was enveloped in an experience so meticulously crafted, it felt like love. Sarah's meals were fit for royalty, the beds luxurious, the attention constant. And yet beneath that perfection, the trap was already closing. Margaret captivated Thomas Kellerman with long conversations about business and politics, making him feel seen and respected, while Elizabeth's sweet laughter at his stories made him feel worldly and admired. But it was Catherine who gave him what he truly craved, the illusion of romance. On his second night, as the other guests slept, she found him by the fire, his eyes fixed on the flames, with the hollow stare of a man clinging to memories. She approached with 2 glasses of Sarah's spiced rum served in crystal that caught the firelight just right. "You seem troubled, Mr. Kellerman," she said gently, settling beside him. "Sometimes sharing a burden makes it lighter." For 2 hours he spilled his soul stories of his late wife, their lost hopes of children, the scent of lavender still haunting his empty home. Catherine listened with perfect grace, touching his hand at the right moments, leaning close with a sympathy that felt almost holy. "Loneliness is a terrible thing," she whispered, "but it doesn't have to be permanent." What happened after was never written down. But by morning, Kellerman's transformed demeanor spoke volumes. He floated through breakfast with the air of a man reborn, extended his stay by 2 days, and vowed to return after his business in Kentucky. "You and your sisters have created something extraordinary," he told Margaret, pressing nearly twice the normal fee into her hand. "I'll tell every traveler I meet." Margaret smiled. "We look forward to your return, Mr. Kellerman. Safe travels." But he would never make it to Kentucky. His horse was discovered days later near Cumberland Gap, wandering alone. Of Kellerman there was no sign. Locals blamed bandits or wild animals, and no official investigation followed. Only the Cunningham sisters knew the truth. Heinrich Zimmer had waited in the woods half a mile from the inn, hammer in hand. Kellerman never saw the blow that crushed his skull. His body, wrapped in canvas, was buried deep in the mountain forest. His purse of gold quietly returned to Millbrook Inn. That night the sisters gathered around their kitchen table, counting the coins and planning their future. Margaret noted the sum exceeded a year's honest earnings. Catherine proved how easily lonely men could be seduced. Sarah had already ensured no trace of the crime would remain. And Elizabeth, bright-eyed and seemingly pure, had kept secrets with practiced ease. No family, no friends, alone on the road. "Perfect," Margaret said, stacking gold with clinical precision. "It was almost too easy," Catherine murmured, still wearing the same tender smile she'd used to disarm him. That cold night they discovered something far more powerful than gold. They discovered how to make men vanish. Over the winter of 1832, the sisters refined their methods into a deadly system. Margaret developed criteria for selecting ideal victims: men who traveled alone, carried wealth, had few connections, and wouldn't be missed quickly. Sarah's role evolved into that of a poisoner, studying toxic mountain flora and perfecting deadly blends that mimicked illness or induced sudden trace-free death. Pokeweed to mimic cholera, foxglove for heart failure, hemlock for rapid silence, her herb garden now a concealed arsenal. Catherine mastered emotional manipulation, molding herself to suit her target's deepest longing. She could be devout intellectual or grieving whatever a man needed she became. Her skill in turning need into trust made her the most dangerous of them all. Elizabeth, though youngest, was indispensable. Her sweet demeanor disarmed suspicion, and her friendly conversations uncovered vital details about guests, their wealth, travel plans, and connections, all without them realizing. Meanwhile, the Zimmer brothers had perfected disposal. Klaus had found hidden mountain caves, accessible only through a rock fall, where bodies could be hidden and left to rot undisturbed. Anything identifiable was destroyed or buried separately. Ezra Hawthorne, the longtime foreman, provided the final layer of protection. With his sterling reputation and carefully measured words, he dismissed any local suspicions. If anyone asked about a missing traveler, Ezra would solemnly confirm they'd stayed at Millbrook Inn, then departed in good health, seen heading west with no reason to worry. Ezra Hawthorne's weathered face and unwavering honesty had long silenced even the most persistent questions about missing guests. So when the spring of 1833 brought William Fraser, a tobacco merchant from North Carolina, traveling alone with nearly $500 in silver, the sisters knew exactly what to do. Fraser, a 38-year-old bachelor known for his solitude and dislike of business partners, arrived on a rainy April evening, drawn in by the warmth and civility of Millbrook Inn. Within hours, the Cunningham sisters were in motion. Margaret engaged him in talk of commerce, gently extracting details about his wealth and travel plans. Sarah's exquisite cooking gave him reasons to linger. Elizabeth charmed him with delicate piano music and a sweetness that stirred his long-buried paternal instincts. But it was Catherine who secured his fate. On the third night, she found him alone in the common room, reading poetry, and asked shy Sincere if he'd read to her. For 2 hours, he did, his voice growing steadier as she listened with rapt attention. When he finished, she softly touched his arm and told him he had the most beautiful voice she'd ever heard. Emotion cracked Fraser's lifelong solitude. "You make me feel alive again," he confessed, his voice thick with longing. "Then don't leave," Catherine whispered, her eyes aglow with perfect mimicry of devotion. Fraser delayed his departure by a week. Catherine drew him deeper into her web, while Sarah introduced mild doses of pokeweed to his tea. The symptoms were vague dizziness, fatigue easily blamed on travel. On his final night, Catherine invited him to her room for a private dinner. Sarah prepared his favorite dish and a wine bottle laced with a fatal dose of water hemlock. As Fraser, heart full and defenses down, poured out his dreams to the woman he believed might be his future, he had no idea the poison was already killing him. By morning, he was dead in Catherine's bed, a seemingly peaceful end attributed to a heart attack. Even if examined, the symptoms matched natural failure in a man his age. He was buried in the Cunningham family cemetery beneath a carved headstone that disguised his grave among generations of kin. His money vanished into the sisters' growing treasury, while his horses and wagon were quietly sold to passing travelers. Locals believed he'd chosen to settle in Kentucky, an easy story never questioned. By year's end, the sisters had perfected a seamless system, no more than 4 or 5 kills per year, each carefully timed and covered by plausible explanations. They fabricated causes of death, staged burial rites, and maintained flawless cooperation. Their conspiracy was airtight. If this tale is chilling, share it with a fellow mystery lover. Hit like and subscribe to uncover the horrors yet to come, because the Cunningham sisters were far from done. Between 1834 and 1845, Millbrook Inn's fame grew beyond Kentucky. Travelers from cities like Baltimore, Charleston, and Boston praised its unmatched hospitality, fine whiskey, and guided hunts. Margaret expanded the business, introducing quality horses, a distillery, and a reputation for legitimate luxury. The guest ledger, now preserved in the Virginia State Archives, captures this golden era, with politicians, merchants, and landowners returning again and again. But hidden within that success was a killing machine running with chilling precision. Catherine honed her skill for identifying ideal victims, solitary men with secrets and no ties. Sarah expanded her knowledge of poisons to dozens of toxins with varying symptoms. Elizabeth, ever sweet and disarming, gleaned financial and personal details from casual conversations. Margaret coordinated everything like a general. During those years, they claimed around 43 victims, a number uncovered later by a railroad surveyor. Each target was profiled with care, watched closely, then neutralized with methodical efficiency. One such victim was Jonathan Waverly, a Pennsylvania land surveyor who arrived in 1838. His solitary profession, valuable equipment, and remote travel schedule made him perfect. He had no close friends, no fixed route, and no one likely to raise alarm. Margaret engaged him on land speculation. Elizabeth asked endless questions about his maps. Sarah cooked meals from Ezra's fresh hunts to form an emotional link between Waverley's work and the inn's comforts. Catherine, though, played a different game. She didn't seduce, she mirrored his passion. She spoke of mountain flora and wildlife with a reverence born from her poisoned studies, impressing him with her apparent knowledge and shared love of the wilderness. "You see what others don't," Waverley told her, his professional walls crumbling. "The order beneath the wild. The mountains have taught me everything." Catherine replied, her gaze fixed on the misty ridge below. About life. About death. About balance. Waverley extended his stay from 2 days to 3 weeks, ostensibly to finish surveying, but in truth, because he had fallen completely under her spell. Sarah, meanwhile, slowly poisoned him with a new concoction, an extract from destroying angel mushrooms, inducing liver failure in a way that mimicked mountain fever. A genuine risk for surveyors, the symptoms fit perfectly. Waverley never stood a chance. The symptoms mirrored mountain fever so precisely that even a skilled physician would have missed the true cause. Jonathan Waverley's death, tragic but unsurprising, was easily explained as another casualty of the frontier. His surveying tools were sold to a Kentucky merchant, his meticulous maps added to Margaret's growing archive of regional intelligence, and his body disappeared into the hidden mountain caves with the rest. His name was quietly recorded in local registries, another unfortunate soul claimed by the wilderness. But the true brilliance of the Cunningham sisters' operation wasn't just in how they killed it, was in how flawlessly they maintained the illusion of virtue. They were model citizens. Margaret sat on the regional merchants' board. Sarah administered herbal remedies to sick neighbors. Catherine taught Sunday school, and Elizabeth organized church socials that brought the scattered mountain families together. Their community involvement granted them alibis, credibility, and access to endless information about travelers. No one ever questioned them. Their wealth, far from arousing suspicion, was legitimized through smart investments. Farmland tenant properties, riverboat shares, and generous loans to local farmers and merchants, all of which returned both income and influence. By 1845, the Cunningham sisters were celebrated as paragons of female entrepreneurship. In a rugged land, their story praised in local newspapers as a triumph of grit and ingenuity. But beneath that admiration lay the buried remains of more than 40 men, each victim enriching their fortune and sharpening their skills. With each kill, they grew bolder, more precise, feeding a cycle of murder for profit that no lawman even suspected. The isolation that once protected them from danger had become their greatest weapon, an invisible fortress that concealed a predatory empire. Millbrook Inn was no longer just a sanctuary for travelers. It was a silken trap, beautiful on the outside, deadly at its core. And yet their downfall would come not from vigilant authorities or desperate family members, but from within. The first cracks appeared in 1849 after a hunting accident left Heinrich Zimmer, the younger of the German brothers, with chronic pain and a growing dependence on laudanum. Heinrich, always the more introspective of the two, had borne the emotional weight of their crimes in silence for years, a burden his stoic brother Klaus ignored or failed to grasp. Sarah had initially prescribed the laudanum to manage his pain, but over time it became his only escape from the guilt that haunted his dreams. As addiction tightened its grip, Heinrich's behavior shifted. Paranoia, erratic moods, and a troubling tendency to speak carelessly. And in a secret like theirs, loose talk was the most dangerous poison of all. The crisis erupted on a frigid February morning in 1850 when Heinrich Zimmer appeared at the kitchen door of the Maine house, eyes bloodshot, hands trembling. His clothes soaked in sweat despite the cold, the result of a sleepless night and laudanum-fueled panic. Sarah was alone preparing breakfast for a North Carolina merchant the sisters had already marked as their next victim when Heinrich whispered, "I can't do it anymore," his voice quivering with desperation. "I see their faces every night. 43 men, Sarah. 43 souls crying out for justice." Though Sarah's expression remained calm, alarm surged through her. Heinrich knew everything: burial sites, murder methods, timelines, and a single confession could destroy them all. "You're not well," she said soothingly, stepping closer. "The laudanum is clouding your thoughts." But Heinrich's voice rose raw with anguish. "I know what we've done, and I know it has to stop." For nearly an hour he wept and raged, while Sarah tried to contain the situation, all the while scanning the ceiling, hoping their guest above hadn't overheard. Eventually she persuaded Heinrich to return to his cabin, promising they'd talk more after he rested. But there would be no talk. That night, with the merchant tucked away, Sarah invited the Zimmer brothers to dinner under the guise of gratitude for their years of loyalty. She prepared Heinrich's favorite meal paired with her signature spiced wine, this time laced with a lethal dose of foxglove. He died quietly in his sleep, his death attributed to a heart condition similar to those that had claimed so many guests. Klaus survived, having drunk less due to his usual moderation, but the poison left him weakened and increasingly dependent on Sarah's treatments. Yet Heinrich's death brought new complications. Klaus, once stoic and obedient, grew suspicious. The timing, the symptoms, the eerie parallels to the very guests they'd buried, all weighed heavily. Margaret, sensing the walls closing in, knew the network of silence and complicity that had shielded them for 2 decades was beginning to crack. She began making contingency plans to abandon Millbrook Inn altogether. Their final victim was Samuel Hartwell, a cotton broker from Savannah who arrived in March 1851 with over $1,000 in gold and a planned business meeting in Pittsburgh. His death followed the familiar script: nights of indulgent food, Catherine's carefully measured affection, and a sudden heart failure. But this time they made a fatal mistake. Hartwell's scheduled meeting was well documented, and when he failed to appear, his associate filed inquiries that reached Virginia authorities. Sheriff Thomas Brennan, a seasoned lawman with a reputation for tenacity, took the case. His initial questions were routine: confirm. Hartwell stayed at the inn and had departed. Margaret and Ezra provided their usual responses, backed by detailed records showing Hartwell's checkout and intended destination. But Brennan was more thorough than past inquirers. A blacksmith recalled shoeing Hartwell's horse, but the timing didn't match. A merchant had seen a man matching Hartwell's description days after he was supposedly gone. None of these details were definitive, but the inconsistencies planted doubt. Brennan expanded his inquiry, cross-referencing other disappearance reports over the years. His review uncovered a disturbing pattern: at least 15 missing men, all last seen near Millbrook Inn. While the frontier was dangerous, the statistical clustering was undeniable. Conducting his investigation quietly to avoid alerting the sisters, Brennan kept digging. His breakthrough came during a chance conversation with Klaus Zimmer outside the general store. Grieving, weakened, and burdened by guilt, Klaus opened up just enough. "My brother. He was troubled before he died," he confided. He spoke of things that kept him awake. "The mountains hold many secrets, Sheriff, and not all of them should stay buried." To a less experienced man, it would have sounded like rambling. But Brennan recognized it for what it was: a veiled confession wrapped in fear. The hunt was on. Sheriff Brennan arranged a discreet meeting with Klaus Zimmer, far from Millbrook Inn, where the truth began to surface in fractured pieces. Klaus, torn between fear, grief, and decades of loyalty, couldn't bring himself to explicitly accuse the Cunningham sisters of murder. But he described enough strange midnight activity, clandestine burials, and Heinrich's mounting distress. It was enough. Armed with a confession in everything but name, Brennan secured search warrants. At dawn on April 15, 1851, 8 armed deputies coordinated with federal marshals surrounded Millbrook Inn to prevent escape. Margaret greeted them with practiced grace, feigning concern and offering cooperation. Catherine appeared shaken and insulted by the suggestion of impropriety. Sarah offered to make tea. Elizabeth, wide-eyed, played the frightened innocent. But their performance couldn't hide the traces of 20 years of murder. The Maine house yielded unmistakable evidence: Samuel Hartwell's engraved silver pocket watch, Thomas Kellerman's leather portfolio, and a trove of letters and photographs linked to dozens of missing men. In Sarah's chambers, investigators found a sinister garden of toxic plants with no medicinal use books on advanced toxicology and journals detailing precise dosages, effects and outcomes entries that aligned too perfectly with the timing and symptoms of known deaths. Then came the final blow. Klaus, facing charges of accessory to murder, led Brennan to the caves hidden behind a rock fall in the mountains. Inside were the skeletal remains of 43 men, their bones accompanied by coins, clothing, and tools. Each grave a silent indictment. Forensic signs told gruesome tales: puncture wounds at the skull base likely inflicted during unconsciousness, strangulation marks, and evidence of slow, painful poisoning from substances like arsenic or mercury. What began as a quiet investigation exploded into national scandal. The trial of the Cunningham sisters became a media sensation, dominating headlines from Richmond to New York. Commonwealth Attorney Daniel Hutchinson laid out a case unlike any in American history: a 2-decade conspiracy of calculated hospitality, emotional manipulation, and cold-blooded profit. Margaret, unshaken, insisted the evidence was fabricated by enemies seeking to ruin them. Catherine shattered under pressure, swinging between denial and sobbing confession that pulled the curtain back on their dark enterprise. Sarah spoke not a word, her silence as damning as any admission. Elizabeth, fragile and tearful, claimed coercion, portraying herself as a pawn in her sister's murderous scheme. Their defense attorney, Marcus Fairfield, leaned heavily on sympathy, painting them as vulnerable orphans surviving in a ruthless frontier driven by desperation rather than malice. He pleaded for mercy, reminding the court of their youth when the killings began, their femininity, and the brutal conditions of the wilderness. But the jury saw through it. They saw the elegance, the calculation, the graves, the wealth, and they knew exactly what the Cunningham sisters had done. But the sheer weight of evidence and the appalling scale of the sisters' crimes left little room for sympathy. The jury took less than 3 hours to return unanimous guilty verdicts for all 4 Cunningham sisters on multiple counts of first-degree murder. Sentencing was swift and uncompromising. Margaret, Catherine, and Sarah were sentenced to hang their execution scheduled for October 12, 1851. Elizabeth spared death only because of her age when the killings began, and her perceived cooperation during the investigation was sentenced to life in prison without parole. On a bleak October morning, hundreds gathered in somber silence to witness the final chapter of the Cunningham legacy. Margaret met the gallows with the same icy composure she had maintained throughout the trial, offering no final words, no apology, no acknowledgement of guilt. Catherine and Sarah stood side by side, their hands clasped as the nooses were placed around their necks. A last moment of unity, starkly contrasting the years of cold-blooded manipulation they had shared. Elizabeth was transferred to the Virginia State Penitentiary in Richmond, where she would spend the next 37 years in quiet isolation. She never confessed, insisting until her death in 1888 that she had been a pawn, not a predator. No one ever visited. She left behind no writings, no testimony, no legacy, but silence. Klaus Zimmer granted immunity for guiding authorities to the burial caves vanished after the trial. Some claim to have seen him in Ohio or Missouri, but he was never found again. Haunted by guilt and grief, Klaus seemed unable to outrun the ghosts of Millbrook Inn. Ezra Hawthorne too faced justice, convicted as an accessory, though his age and cooperation earned him a 10-year sentence. He died in prison in 1854, still protesting that he had believed the sisters' lies and never fully understood what they had done. The inn itself was auctioned off to cover the debts and legal penalties leveled against the Cunningham estate. A family from Richmond, the Fletchers attempted to revive it as a legitimate business. But the land was poisoned by legend. No traveler would spend a night under its roof. The building stood empty for years, its windows dark and its halls echoing with the memory of 43 vanished men, until time and weather finally claimed it. Millbrook Inn, once a place of warmth and whispered reverence, became nothing more than a haunted name, a grim footnote in the blood-stained history of the American frontier. The building stood abandoned for years before a mining company purchased the land, demolishing the inn and converting the property to industrial use. It was during excavation work that the burial caves were rediscovered, the grim resting place of 43 men whose deaths had fed the Cunningham sisters' empire. By court order, the copper mine was permanently sealed, and a simple stone marker was erected near the original site. It remains there today, maintained by local historical societies. The inscription reads, "Here lie unknown travelers, 1832 to 1851. May they find the peace in death that was denied them in life." The case of Millbrook Inn sent shockwaves far beyond Virginia. In response, new regulations were enacted across the region. Stricter guest registries, mandatory death reporting, and regular inspections for inns and hotels serving isolated areas. These reforms, known collectively as the Cunningham Laws, remained in place well into the 20th century and became a turning point in travel safety enforcement. More broadly, the case became a warning, a chilling parable about the darkness that can thrive in places removed from oversight. Investigators began tracking disappearance patterns more carefully, which led to the exposure of other smaller operations that might have otherwise escaped notice. A financial investigation revealed the staggering scale of the sisters' deception. Their estate, including land, business ventures, and cash, totaled over $50,000, an immense fortune at the time. Much of it was used to compensate victims' families and to improve law enforcement in Virginia's remote regions. Modern criminologists studying the case cite a rare combination of elements that made the sisters' operation so successful. Strategic victim selection, refined poisoning techniques, discreet body disposal, and an impeccable front of respectability. Their location gave them privacy. Their reputation gave them a steady supply of victims. Psychological profiles compiled in later studies identify Margaret as the likely mastermind, calculating, methodical, and exhibiting strong antisocial tendencies. Catherine's ability to mimic deep emotional connection suggests traits consistent with borderline personality disorder, while Sarah's obsession with poison reveals a sadistic desire for control masked as healing. Elizabeth remains an enigma, either a manipulated pawn or a quiet, complicit observer, her true role forever unclear. What makes the Millbrook Inn story so disturbing is not just the horror of the crimes, but how close they came to continuing indefinitely. If not for Heinrich Zimmer's mental unraveling, or Sheriff Brennan's relentless curiosity, the sisters might have carried on for decades, smiling, serving, and silently erasing the men who crossed their threshold. Their downfall was as random as it was inevitable, a reminder that countless crimes in history may have gone undiscovered, buried with their perpetrators. The Cunningham legacy endures not only as a dark chapter in frontier history, but as a haunting example of how easily civility can mask savagery, and how vulnerable travelers once were in the vast, unregulated wilderness of early America. In a time when communication was slow and travel fraught with danger, a man could vanish between two towns and remain unnoticed for weeks, even months, if anyone looked for him at all. The Cunningham sisters exploited this vulnerability with chilling precision, transforming the very notion of hospitality into a trap for the lonely and unseen. In the years that followed, the legend of Millbrook Inn lived on in the folklore of Western Virginia, though distorted by time and retelling. Some tales cast the sisters as victims of desperation, driven by poverty and isolation. Others reimagined them as supernatural beings, seductresses, or witches who bewitched their victims through sorcery rather than cunning. But the truth preserved in court transcripts and contemporary newspaper accounts was far more mundane and far more terrifying than any ghost story. Even after its demolition, the land where Millbrook Inn once stood retained its sinister reputation. Hunters and hikers reported finding strange artifacts, old buttons, scraps of fabric, rusted personal items, possible remnants of the inn's forgotten victims. Whether real or imagined, these discoveries only deepened the region's unease. Ground-penetrating radar surveys conducted in the 1980s revealed several anomalies, disturbed soil formations, consistent with unmarked graves. Yet legal and ethical limits prevented further excavation, leaving open the very real possibility that the 43 men found in the cave represented only part of the sisters' total kill count. Today, the Cunningham case file is preserved in the Virginia State Archives, drawing researchers and true crime enthusiasts alike. The sisters' own meticulous records, Margaret's ledgers, Sarah's poison journals, the physical evidence collected at the scene offer a rare and detailed blueprint of serial murder in 19th century America. What makes the Millbrook case truly terrifying isn't the scale of the crimes, but how successfully evil was hidden behind charm, civility, and trust. The story of the Cunningham sisters reminds us that monsters don't always come with fangs or shadows. Sometimes they wear warm smiles and offer weary travelers exactly what they think they need most. So what do you believe, was everything truly uncovered, or do more secrets lie buried in the silent valleys of Virginia? Leave a comment and share your theory about what really happened at Millbrook Inn. If you enjoyed this dark tale, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more forgotten horrors from America's haunted past. Share this video with someone who loves unraveling mysteries, and join me next time as we open another chapter in the chilling history of terror, hidden just beneath the surface of the ordinary. Thank you all very much for watching my video until the end. I sincerely appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.